The Chicago wind cut through the January evening like a blade, carrying with it the scent of snow and exhaust fumes from the rush-hour traffic below. Oprah Winfrey stood in front of the full-length mirror in her modest South Side apartment, her hands trembling slightly as she smoothed down the fabric of her dress. It wasn't new. It wasn't designer. It was a simple cotton dress she'd found at a thrift store on 47th Street 3 weeks ago, pale yellow with small white flowers embroidered along the hem. She'd spent 2 evenings carefully mending a tear in the side seam, and another hour pressing out the wrinkles with her old iron that sputtered steam inconsistently. 29 years old today. 29 years of fighting, clawing, proving herself in a world that seemed determined to keep her small. The mirror reflected back a woman who'd come so far from that little girl in Kosciuszko, Mississippi, yet sometimes in moments like these, she felt like she was still standing on her grandmother's porch in a flour sack dress, watching the other children pass by in their store-bought Sunday best. Her telephone rang, sharp and insistent. Oprah glanced at the clock, 6:15. Her sister would be calling to remind her not to be late to the family dinner. As if she could forget. As if this wasn't the one night a year when her family actually gathered in one place. When her father Vernon's stern expectations and her mother Vernita's critical eye would both be trained on her simultaneously. She picked up the receiver. "Hello? Oprah, baby, you better not be running late." Her mother's voice crackled through the line, already edged with that familiar tone of preemptive disappointment. "Your daddy's got the restaurant reserved for 7:30 sharp, and you know how he gets about punctuality. I'm leaving in 10 minutes, Mama. I'll be there. What are you wearing? Please tell me you bought something nice. This is a nice restaurant, Oprah. Giovanni's on the north side, not some diner." Oprah's eyes drifted back to her reflection, to the thrift store dress that had seemed so cheerful in the afternoon light of her apartment, but now looked almost defiant in its simplicity. "I have a dress. It's fine. Fine." Her mother repeated the word like it tasted sour. "Well, your cousin Patricia flew in from Atlanta, and she looks like $1 million, I'm sure. And Jeffrey will be there with his new wife. She works in fashion, you know." "I know, Mama. You told me 3 times this week." There was a pause, heavy with unspoken words. Then her mother sighed. "Just be there on time, Oprah, and try to smile more. You always look so serious in photos." The line went dead before Oprah could respond. She set the phone down gently, fighting the urge to let her mother's words sink beneath her skin the way they used to. She'd learned, slowly and painfully, to build walls around the tender parts of herself. But family had a way of finding the cracks. She grabbed her coat, a navy blue wool number that had seen her through 3 Chicago winters, and her purse, checking inside for the small wrapped gift she'd bought for herself. A tradition she'd started 5 years ago when she realized no one else would. A leather-bound journal from a bookshop on Michigan Avenue. Something to fill with dreams and plans and all the words she couldn't say out loud. The cab ride to Giovanni's took 40 minutes through snarled traffic, the driver muttering in Polish about the construction on Lakeshore Drive. Oprah watched the city slide past her window, the transition from her neighborhood to the gleaming north side always stark, always a reminder of distances that couldn't be measured in miles alone. The restaurant sat on a corner lot, its windows glowing warm against the dark street. Expensive cars lined up at the valet stand like soldiers at attention. She paid the driver and stepped out onto the sidewalk, the cold immediately finding every gap in her coat. Through the restaurant's window, she could see her family already seated at a large round table near the back. Her father, Vernon, upright and formal even in celebration. Her mother, Vernita, elegant in what looked like a new burgundy dress, her hair styled in the sophisticated waves she'd adopted since moving to Milwaukee. Her half-siblings, Patricia and Jeffrey, both polished and prosperous-looking. Jeffrey's wife, Amanda, blonde and angular in black silk. And her nephew, Andre, 16 and uncomfortable in a suit that looked too new. Oprah took a breath, squared her shoulders, and pushed through the heavy wooden door. The restaurant's interior hit her with a wall of warmth and noise, the clatter of silverware, the murmur of conversation, the rich smell of garlic and wine and expensive cuts of meat. A hostess in a crisp white shirt smiled professionally. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation? I'm meeting my family. The Winfrey party." The hostess's smile brightened with recognition. "Oh yes, Miss Winfrey, they're expecting you. Right this way." As Oprah followed her through the crowded restaurant, she felt eyes tracking her movement. Some curious, some dismissive, some trying to place her face. She was used to it now. The way people in Chicago had started to recognize her from her morning talk show. The way strangers felt entitled to opinions about her weight, her hair, her clothes, her life. Her father saw her first, rising from his chair with the rigid politeness that was his default mode. "Oprah, you made it. Happy birthday, Daddy." She kissed his cheek, catching the scent of his cologne, the same one he'd worn since she was a child. "It's your birthday, baby girl." But his correction was gentle, and his hand squeezed her shoulder briefly before he sat back down. Oprah moved around the table, accepting hugs and air kisses that felt more like performance than affection. Patricia embraced her with the kind of enthusiasm that always seemed calculated, her perfume expensive and overwhelming. "Girl, look at you."
Still working those crazy morning show hours?
"Every day," Oprah said, sliding into the empty chair between Andre and her mother. "How's Atlanta treating you?" "Oh, you know, busy. I just closed on a condo in Buckhead. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, granite countertops. You should come visit when you have time." Patricia's eyes flickered down to Oprah's dress, and something shifted in her expression, a tiny crack in her polished facade. "That's a cute little dress. Very folksy." Across the table, Jeffrey smirked into his wine glass. His wife, Amanda, leaned forward, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the light. "Is that vintage? There's been this huge revival of 70s pieces lately. Very bohemian chic." "It's from a thrift store on 47th Street, Oprah said evenly, reaching for her water glass. "I liked the color." The silence that followed lasted only seconds, but it stretched like taffy, sticky and uncomfortable. Her mother's fingers tightened around her fork, her jaw setting in that way that meant she was choosing her words carefully, which usually meant the unchosen ones were worse. "Well," Vernita finally said, her voice carrying across the table with the precision of a scalpel, "I suppose when you're on television every morning, people don't see what you wear to dinner." Jeffrey chuckled, a sound without real humor. "That's one way to look at it. Though I'd think someone with a TV contract could afford something from this decade at least." "Jeffrey." Vernon's voice cut through the conversation like a judge's gavel. "That's enough." But the damage was already spreading, a stain that couldn't be blotted out. Patricia leaned back in her chair, her lips pursed in what might have been sympathy or might have been satisfaction. "I'm just saying, Oprah, you work so hard. You deserve to treat yourself. There's this boutique in Atlanta. They have the most beautiful pieces, and they're having a sale right now. I could give you the name." "I have plenty of clothes," Oprah said quietly, her hands folded in her lap beneath the table, where no one could see them trembling. "I chose this dress because I like it." Amanda tilted her head, studying Oprah like she was an interesting specimen under glass. "You know what I love about your confidence, Oprah? You just don't care what anyone thinks. That's so brave. I mean, I could never go out looking like I just rolled out of bed, but you own it. That's really admirable." The words landed like slaps disguised as compliments, each one leaving a mark that would bruise later. Oprah felt Andre shift uncomfortably beside her, his teenage awkwardness a mirror of her own internal discomfort. He caught her eye and offered a small, sympathetic smile that felt like the only genuine thing at the table. The waiter arrived with menus, his timing either impeccable or catastrophic. He rattled off the specials in a practiced monotone while Oprah stared at the cream-colored linen tablecloth, at the heavy silverware arranged with geometric precision, at the crystal wine glasses that probably cost more than her dress and coat combined. She thought about her apartment, small but hers, filled with books and the quiet satisfaction of her own company. She thought about the studio where she taped her show, the energy of the audience, the stories she got to tell and hear every single day. "Oprah," her father's voice pulled her back. "What are you ordering?" "The salmon, please, and a side salad." "Always watching your figure," her mother said, and there was something almost automatic about the comment, like a reflex she couldn't control. "Though I saw last week's show, baby, and the camera does add 10 pounds. You might want to talk to your producers about the lighting." Oprah's spine straightened, vertebra by vertebra, her grandmother's voice echoing across the years. "Stand tall, child. Don't let nobody make you small." Hattie Mae Winfrey had said that to her 1,000 times, standing on that porch in Mississippi, her hands rough from work and strong enough to hold up the sky. "The lighting is fine, Mama, and so is my figure." Patricia waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, we're all just looking out for you, sweetie. It's a competitive industry. You have to stay camera ready." I read an article about Joan Rivers, and she said women in television have to work twice as hard to look half as good as men. Joan Rivers also said a lot of things that were mean-spirited and unnecessary, Oprah replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to pump through her veins. "I'd rather focus on content than appearance." Jeffrey leaned forward, his eyes bright with the particular cruelty that came from people who measured worth in material terms. "That's easy to say when you're already on TV, sis. But let's be real. If you showed up to a meeting with network executives dressed like you're going to a church picnic in rural Mississippi, how seriously do you think they'd take you?" The reference to Mississippi was deliberate, a direct hit to the part of her history that her family had always treated like something to overcome, something to hide. Her father had moved them to Nashville partially to escape the poverty and limitations of their southern roots. Her mother had reinvented herself in Milwaukee, shedding the rough edges of her past like a snake shedding skin. Oprah felt something shift inside her chest, a tectonic movement of emotion that had been building for years. She set down her water glass with deliberate care, the crystal making a soft chiming sound against the table. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but carried a weight that made everyone lean in slightly to hear. "You want to talk about Mississippi?" She looked directly at Jeffrey, then let her gaze sweep across the table, landing on each face in turn. "Let's talk about Mississippi. Let's talk about Grandmother Hattie Mae, who raised me on a farm where we didn't have running water. Where I wore dresses made from feed sacks because that's what we had. Where I learned to read by the time I was 3 because my grandmother believed that education was the only way out of poverty." Her mother's face had gone still, a mask of composure that was starting to crack around the edges. Vernon's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. Patricia and Jeffrey exchanged glances, suddenly uncertain. "That woman," Oprah continued, her voice gaining strength, "worked herself to the bone every single day. She took in laundry from white families, scrubbing their clothes by hand, her fingers bleeding in the winter because the water was so cold. And you know what she did with that money? She bought me books. She made sure I had shoes that fit, even if hers had holes in them. She taught me Bible verses and made me recite them in church, building my confidence, teaching me how to speak in front of people." Andre was staring at her now, his eyes wide with something like recognition. He'd never heard these stories, she realized. None of the younger generation had. The family had buried their history under new addresses and better zip codes. "When I moved to Nashville to live with Daddy," she continued, looking at Vernon, who met her gaze but remained silent, "I went from that farm to a house with indoor plumbing and electricity that didn't flicker out every time it stormed. I thought I'd made it to heaven, but I also learned real quick that where you came from mattered to some people more than where you were going." The waiter reappeared with a bottle of wine, hovering uncertainly at the edge of their table. Vernon waved him away with a curt gesture. The restaurant noise seemed to fade, or maybe Oprah's focus had narrowed so completely that nothing existed except this table, this moment, this truth that needed to be spoken. "I wore hand-me-downs to school," she said. "I got made fun of for the way I talked, for being too smart, for reading too much, for being too dark, too poor, too country. I learned to code switch before I even knew what that meant. I learned to make myself smaller, quieter, less threatening. I learned that success meant erasing where I came from, pretending I'd sprung fully formed from somewhere more acceptable." Patricia shifted in her seat, her earlier confidence evaporating. "Oprah, we weren't trying to—" "But here's the thing," Oprah interrupted, and there was fire in her voice now, controlled but burning. "I'm done pretending. I'm done apologizing for coming from nothing. I'm done letting people make me feel ashamed of working my way up from the bottom. This dress?" She smoothed her hand over the yellow cotton, the small white flowers that had seemed so cheerful in her apartment. I bought this at a thrift store because I've been sending money back to Mississippi. Grandmother Hattie Mae is getting older, and the roof on her house needs repairs. The church where she taught me to speak, where I first stood in front of people and found my voice, needs a new furnace. Her mother's face had gone pale. You didn't tell me you were sending money to your grandmother. I didn't think I needed permission, Oprah replied. She raised me, Mama, when you couldn't. When things were hard and complicated and nobody had any good answers, she stepped in. She loved me when I didn't feel very lovable. She saw potential in me when I was just a skinny kid with a weird name and big dreams that seemed impossible. The truth of those years hung in the air between Oprah and her mother. All the unspoken history of a young woman who'd given birth too early, who'd struggled with poverty and limited options, who'd sent her daughter away because she couldn't provide what that daughter needed. Vernita's eyes glistened, but she didn't speak. So yes, Oprah continued, her voice softer now but no less firm, I could have bought an expensive dress for tonight. I could have gone to one of those boutiques on Michigan Avenue and dropped $500 on something designer, but I chose not to. Because this dress is comfortable and it makes me happy, and because the money I saved is going somewhere that matters more to me than impressing people at a birthday dinner. Jeffrey had the grace to look down at his plate. Amanda's perfectly made-up face showed confusion, like she'd walked into a play midway through and couldn't follow the plot. Patricia was examining her manicure with sudden, intense interest. Vernon cleared his throat, a sound that commanded attention. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of authority, but also something else, something that might have been respect. Your grandmother is a remarkable woman. I'm glad you're taking care of her. She took care of me first, Oprah said simply. The waiter returned, more confident this time, and began setting down appetizers that no one had remembered ordering. Calamari and bruschetta and some kind of carpaccio that looked like art on white porcelain plates. The ritual of food created a brief reprieve, a moment for everyone to regroup and reconsider. Oprah watched her family pick at the appetizers, the earlier appetite for criticism seemingly having vanished along with their confidence. The silence at the table had transformed from uncomfortable to contemplative, each person lost in their own thoughts. She could see her mother's hands trembling slightly as she reached for a piece of bruschetta, could see the way her father's shoulders had relaxed just a fraction, the rigid disapproval melting into something more complex. Andre broke the silence, his teenage voice cracking slightly with nervousness. Aunt Oprah, I never knew about your grandmother's farm. What was it like living there? The question was genuine, unfiltered by adult pretense, and Oprah felt something loosen in her chest. She turned to her nephew, seeing in his young face an openness that the others had lost somewhere along the way. It was hard, she said honestly. We got up before dawn every single day. Grandmother would be in the kitchen, making biscuits from scratch, and I'd help her feed the chickens, gather eggs, tend to the garden. In the summer, the Mississippi heat was so thick you could barely breathe, and in the winter, we'd huddle around this little wood stove trying to stay warm. She paused, remembering the weight of those mornings, the ache in her small muscles, the way her hands would crack and bleed from the cold, but also the other parts, the pieces that had shaped her into who she was. But it was also beautiful, she continued, her voice taking on a different quality, something almost dreamlike. Grandmother taught me to see God in everything, in the way the morning light hit the cotton fields, in the sound of rain on the tin roof, in the taste of fresh tomatoes warm from the vine. She taught me that poverty of money didn't mean poverty of spirit. We didn't have much, but what we had, we shared. Neighbors helped neighbors. People looked out for each other. Patricia set down her fork, and when she spoke, her voice had lost its earlier edge. I remember visiting once when I was really little. I must have been 5 or 6. Grandmother Hattie Mae made me feel like I was the most important person in the world. She sat with me on that porch and taught me how to shell peas, and she told me stories about our family going back generations. She did that with all of us, Oprah said. She made sure we knew where we came from. Not so we'd stay stuck there, but so we'd remember what we were carrying forward. The strength, the resilience, the faith. Vernita finally spoke, her voice thick with emotion she was struggling to contain. Your grandmother was a better mother to you than I was, Oprah. I've always known that. It's why I never fought too hard when your father wanted you in Nashville. I thought you'd have a better chance. The admission hung in the air, raw and painful. Oprah reached across the table and took her mother's hand, feeling the delicate bones beneath soft skin, the expensive rings that represented a life rebuilt from ruins. You did the best you could, Mama. We all do. I'm not angry about the past anymore. I'm just tired of pretending it didn't happen. Jeffrey shifted in his seat, his earlier smugness completely gone. I think we all got caught up in trying to move forward so fast that we forgot to honor where we started. I mean, I tell people I'm from Nashville, but I was born in Mississippi, too. We all were, except Andre. And there's nothing wrong with Nashville or Milwaukee or Atlanta, Oprah said firmly. Moving forward isn't the problem. Shame is the problem. Acting like our struggles were something to hide instead of something to learn from, that's the problem. Amanda, who had been silent for several minutes, spoke up hesitantly. I grew up in Connecticut, and my family had money, and honestly, hearing all of this makes me realize how little I understand about real hardship. I think I said some really insensitive things earlier, and I'm sorry, Oprah. That was ignorant of me. The apology was clumsy but sincere, and Oprah nodded in acknowledgement. We all have different stories. The key is listening to each other instead of making assumptions. Vernon had been quiet throughout this exchange, his face thoughtful in the way Oprah remembered from her teenage years when he was working through a difficult problem. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the measured tone of someone choosing words with great care. I pushed you hard, Oprah, maybe too hard sometimes. I wanted you to have opportunities I never had, to go places I couldn't go. But I also wanted you to fit in, to smooth out the rough edges, to not give people reasons to dismiss you. He paused, his eyes meeting hers directly. I was wrong about that. The rough edges, as I called them, they're part of your strength. They're why people connect with you on that show. They see someone real, someone who understands struggle. The entrees arrived, delivered by two waiters working in synchronized precision. Salmon for Oprah, steaks for most of the others, a pasta dish for Patricia. The food looked exquisite, arranged on plates like edible art, but Oprah barely noticed. She was watching her father, this stern man who had given her structure and discipline and high expectations, now admitting vulnerability. I watched your show last week, Vernon continued, cutting into his steak with precise movements. You interviewed that woman who'd escaped an abusive marriage with 3 kids and $10 to her name. The way you talked to her, the questions you asked, the empathy in your voice. You weren't reading from a script. You were connecting soul to soul because you understand what it means to start from nothing. Oprah felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back. That's exactly what I'm trying to do, Daddy, every single day. I want people to see themselves in the stories we tell. I want the woman working 3 jobs to know she's not alone. I want the kid growing up in poverty to believe there's a way out. I want people to understand that our struggles don't define us, but they do shape us, and there's no shame in that. Patricia was crying openly now, mascara starting to streak down her cheeks. I've been so focused on impressing people with what I have that I forgot to appreciate how I got it. Grandmother Hattie Mae would be disappointed in how I acted tonight. Oprah reached across the table and squeezed Patricia's hand. She wouldn't be disappointed. She'd just remind you that people are more important than things, and kindness costs nothing. That's what she always said, remember? Kindness costs nothing. Patricia nodded, wiping at her eyes with her napkin. She used to say that every time someone in the community needed help. Didn't matter if we barely had enough for ourselves, she'd find a way to share. I remember one winter, this family down the road, the Johnsons, their house caught fire. Lost everything. Grandmother organized the whole community to help them. We gave clothes, food, whatever we could spare. I remember that, Oprah said, the memory surfacing with crystalline clarity. I was maybe 7 years old. Grandmother took the quilt off our bed, the one her mother had made, and gave it to Mrs. Johnson. I asked her why, and she said, "Baby, they need warmth more than we do tonight. We can pile on extra blankets, but they got nothing." We slept under every coat and blanket we owned that night. But Grandmother slept sound as could be. Vernon's expression softened in a way Oprah rarely saw. That's the difference between poverty of circumstance and poverty of character. Your grandmother never had much money, But she was richer in spirit than most wealthy people I've known. She taught you that, Oprah. It's in everything you do. The conversation shifted then, the tension that had characterized the evening's beginning dissolving into something more genuine. They ate their meals and shared stories, memories bubbling up from years past. Andre listened with rapt attention as his elders painted pictures of a world he'd never known, a Mississippi that existed in fading photographs and oral histories. Jeffrey talked about visiting the farm one summer and learning to fish in the creek that ran through the property. How grandmother Hattie Mae had cleaned and fried the fish he'd caught and made him feel like he'd provided a feast for kings. Patricia remembered the songs their grandmother used to sing while working, old spirituals and hymns that carried the weight of generations. Even Vanita, who had been most resistant to revisiting the past, began to share memories. Your grandmother took me in when I was pregnant with you, Oprah. I was 18, scared, unmarried, and my own mama had turned her back on me. Hattie Mae opened her door without judgment. She said, "Every baby is a blessing, and we'll figure out the rest." She sat with me during those hard months, taught me how to be a mother even though I wasn't ready, even though I made so many mistakes. Oprah's throat tightened. She'd known the broad strokes of this story, but never heard her mother speak about it with such vulnerability. "You were doing your best, Mama." "My best wasn't always good enough," Vernita said quietly. "But your grandmother's best always was. She had this way of making you feel capable even when you were falling apart. When I finally left Mississippi and moved to Milwaukee, she kept you because she knew you needed stability. She knew I wasn't in a place to give you that yet. And instead of resenting her for being the mother I couldn't be, I should have been grateful." "I think she knew you were grateful," Oprah said gently. "Love isn't a competition. Mama, she loved me and you loved me, just in different ways, in different seasons." The restaurant had grown busier around them, the dinner rush in full swing, but their table felt like an island of intimacy in the midst of chaos. The waiter brought dessert menus, but Vernon waved them away and ordered a birthday cake he'd apparently arranged in advance. It arrived 10 minutes later, a simple chocolate cake with vanilla buttercream frosting and 29 candles flickering in the dim light. The restaurant staff and nearby tables joined in singing "Happy Birthday," and Oprah felt a swell of emotion that had nothing to do with the attention and everything to do with the faces surrounding her. Imperfect people who loved imperfectly but loved nonetheless. Family in all its complicated, messy, beautiful reality. She closed her eyes and made a wish, not for fame or fortune or material success, but for the wisdom to stay true to herself no matter how high she climbed. To never forget the woman in the yellow thrift store dress who knew where she came from and wasn't ashamed of it. When she opened her eyes and blew out the candles, the table erupted in applause. Andre handed her a small wrapped package. "This is from all of us." Well, mostly from Grandpa Vernon, but we all agreed on it. Oprah unwrapped the package carefully, revealing a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate gold locket, antique and beautiful, with intricate engraving on its surface. She opened it and found 2 photographs, tiny and precious. One was of grandmother Hattie Mae, young and strong, standing in front of the farmhouse. The other was of her entire family, taken years ago when Oprah was just a child, everyone crowded together on that same porch. "Daddy, this is beautiful," she whispered, her voice breaking. Vernon's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I wanted you to have something that connected past and present. Something that reminded you that no matter where you go or how successful you come from people who survived, who persevered, who loved fiercely. That's your inheritance, Oprah. Not money or property, but strength and faith and the knowledge that you're part of something bigger than yourself." Oprah fastened the locket around her neck, feeling its weight settle against her chest, right over her heart. "Thank you, all of you. This means more than you know." Patricia raised her wine glass. "To Oprah, to family, to remembering where we come from and honoring the people who got us here." They all raised their glasses, even Andre with his Coke, and drank to the toast. The evening continued with coffee and conversation that flowed easier now, unburdened by pretense. They talked about grandmother Hattie Mae's health, made plans to visit her together in the spring, discussed ways they could all contribute to her care and comfort. As the evening wore on, the restaurant began to empty, early diners heading home while the late crowd trickled in. Their waiter, patient and professional, brought fresh coffee and seemed content to let them occupy the table as long as they needed. Oprah found herself studying each face around the table with new appreciation, seeing past the earlier judgment to the insecurity and fear that often drove people to hurt each other. Amanda leaned forward, her earlier artifice completely stripped away. "Can I ask you something, Oprah? And please be honest. How do you do it? How do you get up every morning and put yourself out there in front of millions of people, knowing that everyone has an opinion about everything you do, everything you wear, everything you say?" It was a real question, vulnerable in its honesty, and Oprah took a moment to consider her answer. "I think about Grandmother Hattie Mae standing in that church in Mississippi, calling me up to recite Bible verses when I was 3 years old. I was terrified. I remember my legs shaking so hard I thought I might fall down. But she stood in the back of that church and nodded at me, and her faith in me was so absolute that I couldn't let her down." She paused, her fingers touching the locket at her throat. "Every time I walk onto that set, every time the cameras start rolling, I think about her. I think about all the people who believed in me when I had no reason to believe in myself. My 4th grade teacher, Mrs. Duncan, who told me I was going to do something important with my life. My high school speech coach, who pushed me to enter competitions even though I was the only black girl competing. My first news director who took a chance on a 19-year-old with more ambition than experience." Vernon nodded slowly. "You've always had that quality even as a child. This determination, this refusal to accept limitations. I learned that from you, Daddy. You never let me make excuses. When I wanted to quit something because it was hard, you'd say, 'Hard is not a reason to stop. Hard is a reason to try harder.' I hated hearing that as a teenager, but it's carried me through every obstacle I've faced." Jeffrey set down his coffee cup with a soft clink. "I owe you an apology, Oprah, a real one. The comment about the dress, about the church picnic, that was cruel and unnecessary. Truth is, I've been jealous. You're doing something meaningful with your life, making a real difference. And I'm just pushing paper in an insurance office, trying to impress people with a fancy title and a house I can barely afford." The admission seemed to cost him something, his usual bravado crumbling to reveal the insecurity beneath. Oprah felt a rush of compassion for her half-brother, this man who'd always seemed so confident but was struggling with his own demons. "You're not just pushing paper, Jeffrey. You're providing for your family, building a life, doing your best. We all are. The mistake is comparing our journeys instead of respecting that we're all walking different paths." "But your path is extraordinary," Patricia said. "You have to admit that. How many people get their own talk show at 29? How many people interview celebrities and politicians and make it look effortless?" Oprah shook her head. "It's not effortless. It's terrifying most days. I wake up at 4 in the morning with my stomach in knots, wondering if I'm good enough, if I belong, if this whole thing is going to come crashing down. I second-guess every question I ask, every outfit I wear, every decision I make. The difference is I've learned to move forward despite the fear, not because I don't have it." Andre had been listening intently, his young face serious. "Is that why you keep working so hard? Because you're afraid it'll all disappear?" The question cut to the heart of something Oprah rarely admitted even to herself. She looked at her nephew, this teenager on the cusp of his own journey, and decided he deserved an honest answer. "Partly, yes. When you grow up poor, when you've known what it's like to not have enough, there's always this voice in the back of your head saying it could all vanish. But it's more than that. I work hard because I feel like I've been given this platform for a reason. Every day I get to talk to people, to share stories that might help someone going through a difficult time. That's not just a job, Andre. That's a calling." Vernita reached over and touched Oprah's arm. "Your grandmother used to say you were touched by God. She'd watch you play acting sermons on that porch, using a stick as a microphone, preaching to the chickens in the trees, and she'd say, 'That child has something special in her. Mark my words, she's going to touch lives.'" The image made Oprah smile, remembering those childhood performances, the way she'd lose herself in the rhythm of words, the power of storytelling. "I still feel like that little girl sometimes, making it up as I go along, hoping nobody notices I don't actually know what I'm doing." But you do know, Vernon said firmly. You have instincts that can't be taught. I've seen you interview people, Oprah. You listen in a way that makes them feel safe, heard, understood. That's a gift. The conversation drifted to lighter topics then. Patricia shared stories about her work in Atlanta, the challenges of being a black woman in real estate, the small victories and larger frustrations. Jeffrey talked about his son's baseball team, the joy of coaching Little League, the simple pleasure of watching his kid hit his first home run. Amanda spoke about her fashion work, but with less pretension now, acknowledging the superficiality of an industry obsessed with appearances. As midnight approached, the restaurant staff began cleaning around them, a gentle hint that perhaps it was time to leave. Vernon settled the check, refusing Oprah's offer to contribute, and they gathered their coats and belongings, preparing to face the Chicago winter waiting outside. On the sidewalk, the cold hit them immediately, breath-forming clouds in the frigid air. The valet brought cars around, and there was an awkward moment of figuring out who was riding with whom, how to extend the evening just a little longer, or accept that it needed to end. Patricia hugged Oprah tightly, whispering in her ear, "I'm going to call grandmother this week. Really talk to her, not just the quick check-in calls. Thank you for reminding me what matters." Jeffrey's embrace was brief but genuine. "You're a better person than I am, sis. Always have been. I'm going to try to do better." Amanda simply squeezed Oprah's hand and smiled. No words necessary. Andre hung back as the others moved toward their respective cars, clearly wanting a private moment. When it was just the two of them on the sidewalk, he shoved his hands deep in his pockets and looked at his shoes, that familiar teenage uncertainty written all over him. "Aunt Oprah, can I tell you something? And you promise not to tell my parents?" Oprah felt a flutter of concern but kept her voice calm. "Depends on what it is, Andre. If it's something that's hurting you or putting you in danger, I might need to tell them. But otherwise, you can trust me." He nodded, accepting the honesty. "The kids at school, they make fun of me sometimes. For being black, for the way I talk, for not having the right sneakers or whatever. And I've been trying to hide it, trying to fit in by pretending I'm someone I'm not. But listening to you tonight, hearing about great-grandmother Hattie Mae and how you didn't let people make you ashamed of where you came from, it made me realize I've been doing exactly what you said not to do." Oprah's heart ached for him. For every young person navigating the cruel landscape of adolescence while also carrying the weight of racial identity, economic insecurity, all the intersecting pressures that made growing up so impossibly hard. "Come here," she said, pulling him into a hug. He was taller than her now, gangly in that way of teenage boys, but he melted into the embrace like a child needing comfort. "Listen to me, Andre. Those kids who are making fun of you, they're doing it because they're insecure about something in their own lives. Hurt people hurt people. That doesn't make it okay, and it doesn't mean you have to accept it. But understanding it helps. But how do you stop caring what they think?" His voice was muffled against her shoulder. "You don't stop caring completely. We're human, we want to belong, we want to be accepted. But you learn to care more about what you think of yourself than what they think of you. You build a foundation inside yourself that's so strong, so solid, that the opinions of others can't shake it." She pulled back and looked at him directly. "Your great-grandmother built that foundation in me. She taught me that my worth came from God, from my character, from my actions, not from other people's approval. She taught me that being smart was a blessing, not something to hide. That being black was beautiful, powerful, part of a long history of strength and survival." Andre nodded, his eyes bright with emotion. "Will you tell me more stories about her? Maybe I could visit her with you in the spring." "I'd love that." "She'd love that. And in the meantime, you call me anytime you need to talk, okay? Day or night. I mean that." Vernon's car pulled up, and Vernita rolled down the window. "Andre, baby, come on. It's freezing out here." Andre squeezed Oprah's hand once more before jogging to the car. Oprah watched them drive away, then turned to find her father standing beside his own car, waiting for her. "You need a ride home?" he asked. "I was going to catch a cab." "Nonsense, get in. We can talk." The interior of Vernon's Lincoln was warm and smelled of leather and the pine air freshener he'd always favored. They drove in silence for several blocks, the city lights streaking past the windows, before he spoke. Your mother and we've made a lot of mistakes with you over the years. Pushed when we should have supported. Criticized when we should have encouraged. I want you to know I see that now. Oprah stared out the window, watching the north side give way to familiar south side streets. You both did what you thought was right. I understand that. Understanding and forgiving are different things. I forgave you both a long time ago, Daddy. I had to, for my own peace. Carrying around anger and resentment, it's like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Grandmother Hattie Mae taught me that too. Vernon was quiet for a moment, navigating a turn with careful precision. She's proud of you. I talked to her last week, and all she wanted to discuss was your show, how you're helping people, how you're using your voice for good. She said, Vernon, that girl is doing exactly what God put her on this earth to do. Tears spilled down Oprah's cheeks before she could stop them. I'm going to see her next month. I've been saving up vacation days so I can spend a full week with her. Just us, sitting on that porch talking about everything and nothing. She'd like that. Time is precious, especially at her age. He glanced over at her. You know, she's got that picture of you on her mantle, the one from when you won your first Emmy. She shows it to everyone who comes by. That's my granddaughter, she says. I raised her. Oprah laughed through her tears. She did raise me, everything good in me, everything strong. It comes from her. They pulled up in front of her apartment building, the familiar brick facade looking shabby in the harsh streetlight but still home. Vernon put the car in park but didn't unlock the doors yet. That dress you wore tonight, he said carefully. Your mother was wrong to comment on it the way she did. But I want you to know something. When you walked into that restaurant before all the conversation happened, my first thought was how much you looked like your grandmother in that dress. She used to wear yellow flowers to church on Easter Sunday. Made her own dresses just like that, simple and pretty. You honored her tonight, whether you meant to or not. The words unlocked something in Oprah's chest, a knot of tension she hadn't even realized she was carrying. I did mean to. Not consciously, maybe, but some part of me knew. Some part of me wanted to carry her with me tonight. Vernon reached over and squeezed her shoulder, a rare display of physical affection. You carry her with you every day, in your strength, your compassion, your refusal to forget where you came from. That's her legacy, and you're living it beautifully. Oprah climbed the 3 flights of stairs to her apartment, her feet aching from the heels she'd worn all evening, the locket heavy and precious against her chest. The building was quiet, most of her neighbors already asleep, only the distant sound of a television filtering through someone's door. She unlocked her apartment and stepped inside, immediately hit by the familiar comfort of her own space. The apartment was small, a 1-bedroom with a galley kitchen and a living room that doubled as her home office, but it was hers. Books lined every available wall, double-stacked on shelves she'd put up herself. Her desk sat by the window overlooking the street, covered with notes and research for upcoming shows. The furniture was mismatched, collected from thrift stores and garage sales, each piece carrying its own history. She kicked off her heels and padded barefoot to the kitchen, filling the kettle for tea. While the water heated, she stood at the window looking out at Chicago, this city that had given her a chance when she'd arrived 5 years ago, young and hungry and convinced she could make something of herself. The late-night city stretched out below her, lights twinkling like earthbound stars, each one representing someone's life, someone's story. The kettle whistled, and she made chamomile tea, carrying the steaming mug to her desk. She pulled out the leather-bound journal she'd bought for herself, the birthday gift no one else had known about, and opened it to the first blank page. The pen felt comfortable in her hand, an extension of her thoughts. She began to write, not about the hurt from earlier in the evening, but about the healing that had followed, about her family's capacity for growth, for honest conversation, for choosing connection over comfort. She wrote about Andre's vulnerability, Patricia's tears, Jeffrey's admission of jealousy, her mother's confession, her father's unexpected tenderness. She wrote about the locket now resting against her heart, linking past and present in a circle of gold. But mostly, she wrote about grandmother Hattie Mae, about the farm in Mississippi that had seemed like the entire world when she was small, about learning to read by lamplight because they couldn't afford electricity, About reciting Bible verses on Sunday mornings while the congregation nodded and said, Amen. About the way her grandmother's hands, rough from work but gentle with love, had braided her hair every morning, telling her she was smart and capable and destined for great things. The phone rang, startling her from her writing. She glanced at the clock, nearly 1 a.m, and felt a spike of worry. Late-night calls rarely brought good news. Hello? Oprah, baby, it's grandmother. The voice, thin and wavering but unmistakably her grandmother's, sent a wave of emotion through her. Grandmother, is everything okay? It's so late. Oh, child, I'm fine. I know it's late, but I couldn't sleep without talking to you. Your daddy called me tonight after your dinner, told me what happened. I wanted to hear your voice. Oprah sank into her chair, gripping the phone like a lifeline. I'm okay, grandmother. Better than okay, actually. We had some hard conversations, but good ones. Real ones. That's what family does when they love each other, right? They tell the truth even when it hurts. Your daddy said you talked about the farm, about our time together. That made my heart glad. I think about those days all the time. About everything you taught me. You know, I wore a yellow dress tonight with little white flowers, and Daddy said it reminded him of your Easter dresses. Her grandmother's laugh was soft, filled with memories. I used to love making those Easter dresses. Couldn't afford much, but I could afford some cotton fabric and thread. Made myself feel beautiful wearing those flowers to church. Made me feel like spring was possible even after the hardest winters. That's exactly how I felt wearing it tonight. Like spring was possible. There was a pause, and Oprah could hear her grandmother's breathing. The slight wheeze that worried her. The reminder that time was not infinite. That these conversations were precious. Baby girl, I need to tell you something. I'm proud of you. Not because you're on television or because you're successful, though those things are wonderful. I'm proud because you stayed true to who you are. You could have let that TV money change you, could have forgotten where you came from, could have become someone unrecognizable. But you didn't. You're still that little girl who shared her lunch with kids who didn't have any, who stood up for the underdog, who believed everyone deserved kindness and respect. Oprah's throat tightened, tears streaming freely now. I'm only that person because you showed me how to be. You lived those values every single day. You were the most Christ-like person I've ever known, and you never had to preach about it. You just lived it. We all do our best with what we're given. I was given you for a season, and it was the greatest blessing of my life. Raising you, watching you grow, seeing that brilliant mind develop. It gave my life purpose beyond anything I could have imagined. You saved me, grandmother.
You know that, right?
If you hadn't taken me in, if you hadn't believed in me, I don't know where I'd be right now. You'd be exactly where you are, child. Maybe the road would have been different, but your spirit, your determination, that comes from inside you. I just watered what was already planted. God made you special, gave you gifts, and it was my honor to help you nurture them. They talked for another hour, about everything and nothing, about the repairs needed on the farmhouse, about the church fundraiser coming up, about neighbors and weather, and the small rhythms of life in rural Mississippi. Oprah told her about upcoming shows, about interesting guests, about the challenges of trying to create meaningful television in an industry that often prioritized spectacle over substance. You keep doing what you're doing, her grandmother said. Keep telling those stories that matter. Keep giving voice to people who don't usually get heard. That's your calling, baby. That's your ministry. When they finally hung up, Oprah sat in the quiet of her apartment, feeling wrapped in her grandmother's love like a warm blanket. She returned to her journal, writing down everything she could remember from the conversation, wanting to preserve every word, every inflection, knowing that these moments were finite and infinitely precious. She wrote until her hand cramped, until the sky outside her window began to lighten with the first hints of dawn. She wrote about identity and heritage, about the courage it took to claim your story instead of letting others define it for you. She wrote about the yellow dress hanging in her closet, about how it had become a symbol of something larger than fabric and thread. The alarm clock buzzed at 5:30, just 4 hours after Oprah had finally fallen asleep. She reached over and silenced it, lying still for a moment in the gray morning light filtering through her curtains. Her body ached with exhaustion. but her mind felt clear, cleansed somehow by the previous night's emotional turbulence and resolution. She dragged herself out of bed and into the shower, letting the hot water wake her up fully. As she dressed for work, pulling on a burgundy blazer and black slacks, she caught sight of the yellow dress hanging on the back of her closet door. It looked different now, imbued with meaning it hadn't carried 24 hours ago. It was no longer just a thrift store find, but a declaration, a bridge between who she'd been and who she was becoming. The drive to the studio took 40 minutes through morning traffic, Chicago waking up around her, people rushing to jobs and schools and appointments, everyone carrying their own invisible burdens and dreams. She thought about all those lives intersecting briefly at stoplights and crosswalks, how everyone had a story, how most people were just trying their best to survive and maybe, if they were lucky, to thrive. Her producer, Deborah, met her at the studio entrance with coffee and a concerned expression. "You look exhausted. Rough birthday?" "Complicated birthday," Oprah said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "But ultimately good. Really good, actually." "Well, you've got Mrs. Henderson in the first segment. The woman who started that literacy program in Cabrini Green. And then the second hour is the panel on single mothers navigating the welfare system." Oprah nodded, her professional mind clicking into gear even as part of her was still processing the previous night. "Mrs. Henderson is going to be incredible." I read her background. 72 years old, teaching kids to read in one of the most dangerous housing projects in Chicago. That's the kind of story people need to hear. In her dressing room, the makeup artist worked efficiently, covering the shadows under Oprah's eyes, preparing her face for the cameras that would scrutinize every detail. Oprah sat still, letting the familiar routine center her, thinking about the questions she wanted to ask, the stories she wanted to draw out. "You okay, Oprah?" the makeup artist asked, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "You seem somewhere else today." "Just thinking about the show, about how lucky I am to do this work." The studio audience was filing in when Oprah made her way to the set, their energy palpable, excited. Most were women, many were black, all seemed genuinely thrilled to be there. She made a point of greeting audience members before the show started, shaking hands, learning names, making connections. A young woman grabbed her hand and held on tight. "Miss Winfrey, I watch your show every single day. You make me feel like my life matters, like my struggles aren't invisible. Thank you for that." The words hit Oprah squarely in the chest, a reminder of why she did this, why the exhaustion and criticism and constant pressure were worth it. "Your life does matter. Your struggles aren't invisible. Thank you for watching, for trusting me with your mornings." The director counted down, the cameras went live, and Oprah felt the transformation that happened every time she stepped into this role. The exhaustion fell away, replaced by focused energy, by genuine curiosity about the people she was about to talk to. Mrs. Henderson was a tiny woman with silver hair and eyes that sparkled with intelligence and determination. She'd been a teacher for 40 years before retiring, but couldn't stand watching kids in her neighborhood struggle with reading while the system failed them. So she'd started a program in her living room, teaching phonics and comprehension to any child who showed up. Within 2 years, she had 50 kids coming regularly, their reading levels improving dramatically. "Mrs. Henderson," Oprah began, leaning forward with genuine interest, "what made you decide to do this? You'd already put in 4 decades as a teacher. You'd earned your retirement." The older woman smiled, her face creasing with warmth. "Child, I couldn't retire from caring. These babies in Cabrini Green, they're just as smart as any kids in the suburbs, but they're getting left behind because nobody expects anything from them. I couldn't sit in my apartment watching TV when I knew I could make a difference." "You're doing this all as a volunteer? You're not getting paid." "Money isn't everything, Miss Winfrey. These children, when they realize they can read, when they discover books can take them anywhere in the world, the look on their faces, that's worth more than any paycheck." Oprah felt her throat tighten, thinking about her own grandmother, about the sacrifices made by black women across generations to ensure the next generation had opportunities they'd been denied. "You remind me of my grandmother. She raised me in Mississippi, And she couldn't afford much, but she made sure I had books, made sure I could read, made sure I knew education was my way out. Mrs. Henderson nodded knowingly. Our grandmothers understood what we sometimes forget. That we lift as we climb. That our success means nothing if we're not pulling others up with us. The interview continued, and Oprah could feel the audience hanging on every word, could sense the collective emotion in the room. When they broke for commercial, several audience members were openly crying. Her producer gave her a thumbs up from behind the cameras. The second hour, the panel on single mothers and welfare, was harder, more contentious. The women on the panel were brave, sharing stories of trying to feed their children on inadequate assistance, of navigating a system designed to be demeaning, of being judged and dismissed by society. Oprah facilitated the conversation carefully, making sure each woman felt heard, pushing back against stereotypes, asking the questions that needed to be asked. One woman, Teresa, was particularly articulate. People think we want to be on welfare, like it's some luxury lifestyle. But I work 2 part-time jobs, I'm going to community college at night, and I still can't afford childcare and rent and food without assistance. I'm trying to build a better life for my kids, but the system makes you feel like a criminal for needing help. Oprah leaned forward, making direct eye contact with Teresa. What do you want people who've never been in your situation to understand? Teresa's voice was steady despite the emotion behind it. That we're human beings with dignity, that we love our children just as much as anyone else loves theirs, that circumstances beyond our control, like my husband leaving, like losing my factory job when the plant closed, these things don't make us failures. We're survivors. We're fighters. And we deserve respect, not judgment. The audience erupted in applause, and Oprah let it continue. Let Teresa absorb the validation she so clearly needed and deserved. When the show finally wrapped, Oprah stayed on set longer than usual, talking to audience members, hugging the panelists, thanking Mrs. Henderson for her courage in sharing her story. Back in her dressing room, Oprah sank into a chair, the adrenaline of the live show finally wearing off. Deborah knocked and entered, carrying a stack of message slips. You've got 3 interview requests from major newspapers about the show. 2 magazine profiles want to schedule time, and your agent called. Says NBC is interested in talking about a syndication deal that could take your show national. Oprah stared at the message slips, the words not quite registering. National syndication. That meant not just Chicago, but potentially every major market in the country. That meant reaching millions instead of hundreds of thousands. That meant a platform beyond anything she'd imagined when she'd first started in television. What did you tell them? She asked quietly. I told them you'd call back after you'd had time to think. Oprah, this is huge. This could change everything. I know. And she did know, could feel the weight of the opportunity settling onto her shoulders. But instead of fear or doubt, she felt something else, certainty, purpose. Her grandmother's voice in her head saying, that's your calling, baby. That's your ministry. She thought about Mrs. Henderson teaching kids to read in her living room. About Teresa working 2 jobs and going to school and still needing assistance to survive. About all the stories that needed to be told, all the voices that deserved to be heard. About the young woman in the audience who'd said Oprah made her feel like her life mattered. Set up the meetings, Oprah said. But make it clear that if we go national, the show's mission doesn't change. We're not chasing ratings with sensationalism. We're telling real stories about real people. We're creating conversations that matter, Deborah grinned. I wouldn't expect anything less from you. This is going to be incredible, Oprah. You're going to change television. After Deborah left, Oprah sat alone in the quiet dressing room, still wearing the makeup and clothes from the show, the locket from her father resting against her chest. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from that farm in Mississippi to this moment, from poverty and limitation to possibility and purpose. She thought about the yellow dress hanging in her closet, about how something as simple as a piece of thrift store clothing had sparked a conversation that healed old wounds and created new understanding within her family. She thought about how authenticity, even when it was uncomfortable, was always more powerful than pretense. Her phone rang, and she picked it up to hear her grandmother's voice, thin but excited. Oprah, baby, I just finished watching your show. Mrs. Henderson, that woman is doing God's work. And those mothers on that panel, You treated them with such dignity, such respect. You made them feel seen. That's what you taught me, grandmother. To see people, really see them, not as stereotypes or statistics, but as whole human beings with complex stories. And now you're going to take that gift to the whole country. Your daddy called me, told me about the syndication talk. This is just the beginning, child. You're going to touch so many lives. Oprah felt tears sliding down her cheeks, no longer caring that they were ruining her makeup. I'm scared, grandmother. What if I'm not ready? What if I fail? Baby, you've been ready your whole life. Everything that happened to you, every hardship, every triumph, it's all been preparing you for this. And as for failure, well, the only real failure is not trying. You taught me that yourself when you were 6 years old and decided to teach yourself to read before you started school. You didn't wait for permission. You just did it. They talked until Oprah's assistant knocked on the door, reminding her she had a meeting with the station manager in 10 minutes. She said goodbye to her grandmother, wiped her tears, and looked at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was tired but determined, scared but resolute, carrying the weight of her history and the promise of her future. She thought about all the women who'd come before her, her grandmother and her mother and all the unnamed ancestors who'd survived slavery and Jim Crow and poverty and violence, who'd passed down strength like DNA. She thought about all the women who would come after her, who would need to see someone who looked like them succeeding, thriving, refusing to be diminished. The yellow dress had been a test she hadn't known she was taking, a test of whether she would choose authenticity over approval, substance over appearance, truth over comfort. And in choosing authenticity, she'd unlocked something essential, not just for herself, but for her family, for the people who watched her show, for everyone who needed permission to be themselves without apology. As she walked out of her dressing room toward her meeting, toward her future, Oprah touched the locket at her throat and whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude. For her grandmother's wisdom, for her family's capacity to grow, for the platform she'd been given and the responsibility that came with it, for the yellow dress that had reminded her who she was and where she came from, and for the courage to keep moving forward, one authentic step at a time, carrying the past with her while creating a future that honored every person who'd helped make her possible. The birthday that had started with mockery had ended with clarity, with purpose, with the unshakable knowledge that her greatest strength would always be her refusal to pretend to be anything other than exactly who she was. A woman from Mississippi who wore thrift store dresses and told the truth and believed with everything in her that every story mattered and every voice deserved to be heard.